So today, I thought we'd take a look at some unreleased weapons gameplay, because after my video covering 32 different weapons and gadgets from the middle of last year, some of those have now been released into the game, but there are still quite a few of them that are sitting in the files, not really doing anything. Obviously, all of this gameplay should be taken with your regular pinch of salt, although you probably had quite enough salt for a lifetime watching these data mine videos, so just be aware that none of this footage is quote-unquote official right now, and it may be incorrect as well, because some of these weapons might have been cancelled, and some of this gameplay is quite old. I've got gameplay of most of these weapons and gadgets, but for those that I don't have footage for, I'll just show some images on the screen for you. Starting things off, we have something that was recently updated in the files, the K31-43 bolt-action rifle. This model of the K31, it came with an integrated set of iron sights and an affixed telescopic sight offset to the left of the receiver. That way the user could use either sight option. And that's reflected in Battlefield 5. The player can use the select fire button and they can switch between iron sights and a 3x zoom optic. Now, according to data miner Temporal, update 5.2 before Christmas included an almost fully working version of this weapon, so that might mean that this weapon is close to lining up for a release into Battlefield 5. Next up is the M1917 Enfield rifle. This is an American conversion of a British Lee Enfield rifle, and unofficially during World War I, this weapon was the standard issue rifle of the American Expeditionary Force, and I say unofficially because the Americans didn't really want people to know that there were more 1917 Enfields on the front line than there were 1903 Springfields. Now, in Battlefield 5, this weapon would currently fill the gap in the recon class when it comes to American bolt-action rifles. There isn't really a proper one available to soldiers, and of course, we're playing through the Pacific Theater at the moment with the American faction. The community has noticed that DICE hasn't really been saying anything about this either, so whether the plan is to introduce this weapon in the second half of Chapter 6, that remains to be seen. I guess it is somewhat of a possibility. There are still several weeks of the Tides of War currently missing from the menus, and of course it would be a welcome addition for players who want a proper American bolt-action rifle in Battlefield 5. Then there's this wacky looking thing. This is the M3 infrared sniper carbine. It's a converted M2 carbine with an infrared scope stuck on the top of it. Although this gun technically did exist, this is a real weapon, it never officially existed. Over 2,000 units were produced during the prototype phase, and the weapon was used in World War II combat, but it was never officially made into a proper weapon. It was fielded first at the Battle of Okinawa by the Americans, who would use it to pick off Japanese soldiers during the night who would be moving around under the cover of darkness. Now, apart from the receiver being slightly modified to accept that infrared scope on the top of it, the M3 is essentially just an M2 carbine underneath. They function exactly the same way. Now, we don't have any gameplay of this weapon right now, but it has been mentioned in the files since the start of the Pacific Theater and that content rolling out, so there may be a chance that we see this later on in Chapter 6. And then lastly, for the rifles and carbine section, we have the Type 44 bolt-action carbine. Officially titled the Type 44 cavalry rifle, this weapon went into production in Japan in 1911, and it served on into the Second World War. Now, I could see this being a competitor to the Jungle Carbine, which is already available to the medic class that launched with Chapter 5, but at the moment, no gameplay of this weapon right now. That's kind of telling. Maybe this is not going to make it any further than just being mentioned in the files. Okay, moving on to some other weapon classes now. We're going to go over to SMGs first of all, and we're going to roll back the clock a little bit here. The first one, the Welgun, that was mentioned by data miners in early 2019. And dog tags have been found for the weapon, along with several others as well, suggesting that at the time this was first found, the weapon was somewhat near completion. However, we're now in early 2020, almost a year later, and the weapon is still nowhere to be seen. Based on this footage here, it appears that the weapon is functioning correctly, or at least that's what it looks like to me anyway. So that leaves me questioning why DICE has not yet introduced the weapon. Could they be waiting for a chapter in the future of Battlefield 5 where we go back to the European action of World War II? Perhaps, perhaps not. The weapon is still waiting in the dark to be released at the moment. A similar story follows the Patchett SMG, or the Sterling as you might know it. This is another of those weapons revealed by their dog tags all the way back at the start of 2019, and right now there is just no mention of this coming to the game at all. This was a replacement for the Sten in real life, but it didn't end up starting that replacement process until after the war ended. The Lanchester SMG is also another weapon that DICE hasn't got around to releasing yet. This is almost a direct copy of the German MP28 SMG, however. It was created by the British, and that might have something to do with the fact that the gun is currently not in the game. Why would you add such a similar weapon to one that's already available in the multiplayer lineup? That kind of makes sense to me. That being said, it does have dog tags completed for it, so at some point in the past, it must have been on the cards for a release, but circumstances changed. We do need to talk about the absolute meme that is the Sjogrens machine gun. Available as part of the single-player segment of Battlefield 5, the Sjogrens has been long asked for by the community. The amount of Reddit posts that I've seen asking for this thing is just ridiculous. And even at stages, this weapon has been glitched into the multiplayer section of the game, proving that it's pretty much ready to be released. But still to this day, DICE has not released it, and I'm kind of giving up hope that they ever will release it. It was used during World War II when units were captured by the Germans, but it was famed for its reliability issues, and it featured much more heavily in World War I. There is another meme weapon in Battlefield 5, the Sjogrens shotgun, that appeared for a few seconds in one trailer and then completely disappeared. Whether this was just a weapon being used as a placeholder for other weapons, we can't really be sure, but that may well have been the case, since the Sjogrens shotgun featured heavily in Battlefield 1, depicting World War I, and it didn't feature so much during World War II. But the fact that we did see it included in trailers, that leads me to think it must have at least been functioning in some manner for DICE to have warranted using it. Okay, moving on to some pistols now. The Welrod pistol was included in the Chapter 4 trailer for Battlefield 5, so it should have been a weapon that had come to the game at that point, but the 5v5 mode was cancelled, as we all know, and all of those weapons and gadgets, they were kind of put into limbo, because they weren't configured in the same way as standard gadgets and weapons in Battlefield 5 multiplayer. For some reason, they were configured differently between 5v5 and everything else. Some of those weapons from 5v5 have started to enter into the main multiplayer after being converted from their positions in 5v5. We've got the M2 carbine and the bazooka now, but others remain locked away, and the Welrod is one of those. I am hoping that as we move through Chapter 6, 7 and 8 that we start to see more of these previously earmarked 5v5 weapons make it into multiplayer, and the Welrod would be a really exciting one. It's got rather an interesting design. The From a Stock Auto, a tanker pilot weapon included in Battlefield 1, is also present in the files and appears to be fully functioning. Perhaps this could become part of the Recon class, slotting alongside pistol carbines. The Repetier Pistol M1912 P16, perhaps the longest and most convoluted name of any weapon available in Battlefield 5, is an automatic pistol that has been showcased with gameplay in the past. This was also a Battlefield 1 primary weapon included with the Turning Tides DLC. The suppressed M1911 is in the files too, being showcased here with a bayonet charge of all things, which is totally not how that weapon should work, but still pretty fun to watch. And then the suppressed Walther PPK is in the files as well. There were rumours that this would be launching with the Pacific Theatre, but as it stands, the weapon is still locked away. There are unreleased gadgets in the files as well. We have this one here, the Einstos Flammenwerfer 46. That's a single-use flamethrower gadget that can deal devastating damage to nearby infantry. I, for one, would love to see that in the jungle on Solomon Islands. The Goliath mine, this is a remote-controlled, tank-shaped explosive device that is supposed to drive underneath tanks and then detonate, that isn't working at the moment on its last outing. And personally, I don't think this is something that DICE would be adding into the main multiplayer. It is a cool-looking gadget, admittedly, but I just don't think it kind of fits with the pacing. Then we have the knee mortar, which is a Japanese invention that's been found in the files for quite a few months now, but DICE had said they were reluctant to add any kind of mortar into the game since the spam that came with Battlefield 1 was a bit overwhelming. I remember DICE developers talking about that before the launch of Battlefield 5, so something like this is probably not going to end up in the game. There's the Panzerschreck, that's here too. This is likely to come to the game, but maybe when the action moves back to mainland Europe. And then lastly, we have the Doppelschuss. We spoke about that the other day, a double-barreled flare gun that is set to arrive later on in Chapter 6. Most of these weapons and gadgets, I do think they have a place somewhere in Battlefield 5. Not all of them, but most of them. I think all of the weapons should be included, but there are a couple of gadgets that might just not fit with what DICE is going for. We do know that DICE has their plan to drip feed content into the game to keep players coming back week after week. That's just how it's been for a long time, and that's probably how it's going to remain for the rest of Battlefield 5. And it seems they've got a lot of stuff waiting in the wings that they could be adding. Let me know which of them you'd like to see most down below in the comments. But thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.